Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you join us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations. And yes, apologies about last week. It was all go right until the last minute. And I was in the middle of the country with no Wi-Fi or phone signal at all. And I managed to just about muster up enough to be able to call John and let him know. But you weren't around really either, were you?
No, I was under the weather. I was genuinely ill from the coronavirus, yes.
First time we'd caught coronavirus
yes,
as well.
Yes, it is too.
All fun.
It knocked me flat. Yes.
So Diane was out, I was out, Craig was out, and so it was... and Sam was out as well. So it all came down to a bit of the last minute, but unfortunately I couldn't get the message through to anybody back at the office in the UK to put up warnings and let everybody know that we were actually cancelling it. So thank you to Glenn for stepping in on the chat very last minute, and thank you to everybody who joined in on the chat despite the fact that we'd never actually went live. And welcome back to that program that we were supposed to do last week. We're going to do it today, and as you can see, we've got our snake out and we're ready to go. We're going to be dealing with snakes and legs and all sorts of interesting things. So you can see our big giant boa constrictor on the wall behind us. All right, so we're going to kick things off then with a couple of ministry reports, because it's been a while since we've had the likes of Craig on in the middle. But first of all, Diane, we've been running around this last week getting ready for something.
Yes, next week we are having a big convention on the other side of the country over in Whitby. So exciting things coming up.
And we've been planning and preparing all of that. So there's an awful lot going on. And you've been gluing things together today as well.
Yes, we have. We've been gluing bones together. Well, they're not original bones. They are actually a museum quality cast. And we have the results here for all to see.
And so some of you remember that a couple of weeks ago we had our program on Lucy, and we went into detail. Well, we finally got her mounted, which will form a part of a new display on human evolution and ape men and design and human biology and all sorts. And in the next day or two, at least two of these casts will be on their way to Australia, courtesy of Des, who helps with the and supports the museum project over in Australia. And he's coming to visit us tomorrow, and we'll be sending two of the copies of these casts over to Australia to go in both the Brisbane Museum and to Craig's Museum. So do keep an eye out for all sorts of news about the museums and how they're developing there. But let's go over to Craig now, because it's been a while since we've heard from him. Craig, you've been on a trip, and why don't you give us your ministry report?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And looking forward to getting that skeleton. That'll be fantastic, because it's one of the big questions that people have is about human evolution. So that'll be great. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Great to be back. It's been a while. I'm halfway through my 2-month trip through central Eastern Australia, and I'm sitting in Longreach Baptist. Longreach is in central Queensland. It's sometimes called the outback capital of Australia, but probably more accurately, at least, outback capital of Queensland. And it's got the Stockman Hall of Fame and a bunch of things around. But I just thought I'd give a quick summary of where I've been and what I've been doing. So I might get my slides up, if that's okay, Joe, and just quickly go through that. Crossed the Bass Strait on the ferry on 11th of June. Went to Melbourne, did a few talks there at a school to teachers and at a church there a couple of nights. Then across to Ballarat, Connect Baptist at Ballarat for an evening. Then across to Portland, there's Pastor Frank and Derek, who's my travelling companion, standing in front of some very interesting laid down sedimentary rocks on the coast there. Went to the Portland Petrified Forest, which is probably not a forest. It's more likely associated with tree roots and so on. We won't go into the detail of that, but it was a very interesting site to have a look at. Then across to Warrnambool, then up to country Victoria, Wedderburn, up near the Murray River. Beautiful little Church of Christ building there. It's been there the best part of 150 years or so. Then up to Deniliquin. I worked there many years ago in the 1980s on the River Red Gum Forest. Was up there very, very hard timber used by charcoalers, railway sleepers, all that sort of stuff. So that was good to visit back there. Then our longest trip for that period up to Cobar in the middle part of New South Wales, crossed to Nyngan that night and spoke at the Little Baptist Church there. Then across to Warren, it's my friend's property, a beautiful location where his house was situated and his property there. So it was lovely to stay there and go and speak at some schools in the area, including New South Wales' most remote primary school, a little school 100 kilometres north of Warren out in the sticks, no houses even nearby, nine children at it. So that was really interesting to do. Then up to Cunnamulla. So the rivers are the lifeblood of these outback towns, which are otherwise very subject to drought. And Cunnamulla was an interesting place, very struggling in its the Christian church. I was able to meet some of the Aboriginal elders of the town. You can pray for this chap. I think his name was Dave, and he's really searching for God, and he was at the talk, and it was really great to speak with him. And he had some great stories too of the local Aboriginal culture. And then up to Charleville, which was a fine church service, and you can see that there. That was a great time. Then across to Eromanga, which is home to Australia's biggest sauropod dinosaur, 30 metres long. And we visited the museum way out in the middle of nowhere, but it's beautifully laid out, full of all the evolutionary storytelling. They've got some great bones on display, and there's some of the sauropod fossil bones that they've dug up in the local property that they've put the museum on. We also did some fossil preparation work as part of the tour that we did, and we're working there on a megafauna. So that's a Diprotodon, or a giant wombat fossil. And my daughter with me, she was really excited to uncover a decent piece of bone as part of that. So that was a lot of fun, and learn a few techniques that they use there. It was interesting to see this on display there, and that's just a couple of examples of many others that they had. But if you read those individual signs, you can see that they're actually saying that all these fossils, even though they're 50 to 90, 95 million years old, according to their timeframes, they actually haven't changed. They're very similar to what we see in Australia today. So good evidence for creation rather than evolution, one would think. It's a pretty dry, remote area. There's my family. They joined me at Charleville, and that's out towards Eromanga at Quilpie. This really drying environment. So I've been able to do a few other bits and pieces while we've been travelling. In fact, right at that site, we found some petrified timber, and it's throughout this region. Lots of fossils. Not that I've had a lot of time to fossil hunt, but there's lots of fossils in the area, and hopefully we'll be doing that in Winton. Some of these eucalypt trees. So I come from Tasmania, where we've got the tallest flowering plant in the world, which is a eucalypt. Out here, it struggles to the eucalypts struggle to grow very tall at all, and you can see this mallee form of growth where they all shoot out of the root base. So that's a single tree, even though there's 5 or 6 stems in each one of them. And that's where we're at now. So that's the trip to date. I've done about 25, 26 speaking engagements when you count all the schools and various talks at different churches. And that's what I've been doing. So you can come back to us. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks very much for that, Craig. Let's close this down.
Craig, can I just ask a question for the listeners and viewers' sake? Number one, how far is it from Tasmania to Longreach? You've been on the road for X days. how many kilometres are we talking about? Because I remember travelling to Australia with an Englishman on the plane, and he told me he was going to land in Cairns and drive to Brisbane next day for the cricket. Now, this is a perception many people have. How far are we talking about that you've been travelling?
Yeah, so I've done about 4,000 kilometres, which I haven't done my maths, but it must be about 2,800 miles or something like that for our American friends. Yeah, it's a long distance. It's really deceptive out here, where you think you've got a nice straight road to from Longreach, from Eromanga, and doesn't look that far necessarily on a map, but then it takes you the best part of 5 hours to drive that stretch in a day. So we've got to do to get back to Brisbane from here.
Okay, there's one other thing I'll make a comment on before I might ask you a forestry question. Somebody on the chat has asked, where do you get such funny names from? And the answer is, if you come to Australia, you'll notice that we have English names. So you mentioned Charles. What town was that? one?
Charleville.
Charleville, that's right. Ville is an old Anglo-French word. So you go Charleville. Charleville comes from a property name in Ireland. From there you go back, even end up with Charlemagne, right? So these are many cultural origins. Some of the ones that Europeans find strange are Aboriginal. But if you go back further, we've done quite a few programs on Aborigines, and I'll be doing this at the conference next week by Zoom. Some of them you'll find you can trace back to India. So we have Indurapilli. There are many Pillis in Australia, and they are essentially Indian names. And of course, you then get the made-up ones that we're all pretty good at making up names that we borrow from other cultures. So, Craig, one last question. You mentioned a word that most people won't have heard of, like mulga and things like this with the gum trees. Can you describe what you meant by the gum trees all growing from one root base out and looking like many trees?
Yeah, so with the eucalypts, the reason that they really are the dominant tree species in Australia is because they've survived the drying climate, and some of those pictures might have given you the idea of how dry it really gets. And they have some of these techniques, like this ability to resprout from the root base after fire, after drought, after being lopped even and chopped. So that's one of their techniques. The others are things like their leaves hang down vertically, so they're not sort of fully facing the sun. They've got a waxy coating often. They've got the ability to close the stomata pores in the leaf to stop the loss of water. And they've got a whole bunch of techniques and they've got a woody fruit, which is another interesting one. It's not a fleshy fruit. It's actually a wooden fruit, and they're really tough, and they can be held in there until the right time where they'll open and spray their seed across the soil. But the soils here are really tough. They dry and they crack and they stretch, and they can actually kill trees just by the contracting and stretching. I guess Glenn would be the best one to talk about some of those processes, but it can kill the trees.
If you grew that tree over towards the coast, would it still take the same form, or does it just revert back to a normal sort of gum tree?
Well, some of these beautiful eucalypts from the outback areas are actually used as street trees in other parts of Australia, because they can be beautifully flowering in a different environment. And yes, they definitely grow much better in different environments.
Good. Back to you, Joe.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. We're going to move swiftly on to Glenn, who's got a report to share with us as well.
And I had a question about his map as well and his travels, because I have a different map here. One of the things that I've been working on is dealing with the flat earth. And Australia here is a little bit different shape than what you have. According to this map of Australia, you should have probably been in the ocean already. But anyway, I've got this, and I'm going to be using it to demonstrate some of the beliefs in the flat earth and how it's not valid. And on my radio broadcasts on Sundays, I've got 2 sessions coming up on the flat Earth. Let's go to my slides, and I'm going to share these with you. So Creation Station is what we keep our fossils in, and we travel around and use it as a traveling museum. But last week we got to use it here at our own house because we had the founders of a ministry called Project Bible Runners. This was Owen and Jess Schweitzer and their 5 kids. And they were traveling into our area to collect Bibles. Our community and our church are one of the places that collects Bibles. And then they distribute these pretty much all over the African countries. And to people that, are just desperate to get God's word. There's like one Bible for every 300 people. And so it's a tremendous ministry. They've got some incredible testimonies. And they also collect monies to print Bibles in the native languages. And so we took them and brought them through the Creation Station, showing them the fossils and then talking to them about how these show that the Bible is true. And then we took them into what my wife calls our fun room. It's a room off of the garage where she does a lot of her arts and crafts. And we set up the fossils along with the displays we use when we take it on the road. The kids' favorite, you can see their kids over here on the right, is holding dinosaur poop. That's always their favorite, holding dinosaur poop right there in front of their parents and getting away with it, So they had a great time seeing all this. But what we wanted was for them to realize as they're handing out these Bibles that they would have the evidences that they can say, hey, I've spoken to scientists, I've held these in my hands, and this shows that God's word is true. In so many of those countries that they go to, though, the people know it's true, and that's why they're desperate to get it. One of the other things we did is we did a simulated fossil dig, and we spread out sediment, and we put some shark teeth in it and let them go through looking for the shark teeth. One of the most common ways we find shark teeth is digging sediment up from the bottom of a creek and then just wet sieving it. And so we let them find the shark teeth. One of the cool things is we prepare up some bags of sediment, and we always make sure there's a shark tooth in it. But these kids were finding 4 and 5 in each bag, and we know we didn't put those in there. So God was just really good. So we had a really fun, special day ministering to those that minister to others. And of course, they got to spend a day in the pool as well, which was just a fun day. Special family. And a really special ministry. So check out Project Bible Runners. With that, I'm through.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And so we're here in the museum today, and we've been planning and preparing and doing all sorts of stuff for the last few days in terms of trying to get it ready and organised and sorted for the convention and try and do some filming and stuff. So that's why you can see it's a little bit messy directly behind us. We're renovating the whole of this back wall. There'll be display cases on each end and a big telly to be able to do presentations and all sorts. But what you can see we've mounted up behind us, because it's a nice big area to be able to mount it, is one of the new specimens that we picked up just a few weeks back. It's a pretty sizable boa constrictor.
Yes,
so our topic today is snakes, right? And when snakes had legs and all that kind of stuff. And a big part of the theme which we'll be dealing with and talking about is this theme of good to bad to worse. We've spoken about it many, many times, and we've shown you examples like, Craig actually had an example of this earlier. This is a modern day mackerel shark tooth, and this is the megalodon tooth. Right, quite a size difference, even though by all appearances and all forms of being able to categorize them morphologically, a megalodon tooth is effectively just a very, very large great white shark tooth. Oh, it's recently been changed. It's been changed from Carcharodon megalodon, which is the same family as the great white shark, to Odotus megalodon. But really the only reason for doing that is to try and separate it evolutionary. because you see, if you go into the Houston Museum of Natural Science, where they still call this Carcharodon megalodon, by the way, they will show you Carcharodon megalodon next to a great white shark, and they will say, look at how much sharks have evolved. I'm sorry, you're using the wrong word there. This is not evolution, this is devolution. And so what they decided was to change Carcharodon megalodon to a different type of shark. So that went from small teeth to big teeth, because that looks better for the evolutionary story. But we at Creation Research, and I've discussed this with John a number of times, we still believe that this is just a great big great white shark, and it shouldn't surprise us, because you see the world has gone from good to bad to worse. That's the biblical picture. In the beginning, everything was very good. Man messed up and the world was cursed. And in the book of Romans, it says that the whole universe groans as a result of this curse, as a result of sin. And so it's not just something that affected man, and now man dies, but it's something that affected the whole world. And by the time you get to Noah's flood, the Bible says that the world was so evil, every thought of man's heart was only evil continually, so God judged it with a global flood, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And at the end of the flood, after Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives, and 2 of every kind of animal and 7 of every kind of clean animal had left the ark, God promises Noah that there will now be climate change. For as long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold, heat, summer and winter. And so you've got a world that's gone from good to bad to worse, and now you've got adaptation, which is being forced onto animals as a result of changing climate. You've got extinction as a result of changing climate. It's now a hard to live place, this world, and the world has gone from good to bad to worse. Humans have gone from good to bad to worse, and so have the animals. And you see this not just in the megalodon, you also see it in things like this fossil here. It doesn't look like much, but this is the top snout of one of the largest crocodiles ever to have existed, called Sarcosuchus. It was 10 times bigger than the modern Nile crocodiles, but really identical in every other way. Again, just like the megalodon, good to bad to worse. Glenn might recognize this fossil. He helped me carry it back from a place in Tennessee. It's a giant fossil tree stump. In fact, we couldn't bring the biggest ones that we found because they were rather sizable, weren't they, Glenn?
Yes. I still have some in my garage. They're quite big.
Yeah. But this one is one of those equisedum, the horsetail rushers. And you see there today, they're spindly little things. We saw some of them on a walk the other day. But you see,
little things,
in the past, they were great big trees. And if you come with me to the Welsh mountains, you can find club mosses that sprawl out across the ground. In Australia, you have your tassel fern, which is the club moss equivalent, right? It's a tiny little thing. And yet in the past, we know that they used to be giant trees because this is one of their roots. Identical in every way, but just much, much bigger in the past. So this whole concept of good to bad to worse is a biblical concept. It's a concept that we see in the real world, and it's a concept that we see in snakes as well.
Yes,
well, Diane,
indeed.
Why don't we get up and go and have a look at our snake skeleton over here?
Snake.
While you do that, I'm
Yes.
going to just add in a different camera so we get a little bit of a different angle on things. And this should have all been done, of course, by Sam, but we don't have Sam at the moment. So
Yes.
just bear with me while I do this. And then hopefully up on the screen will pop, if it will work. There we go. Up on the screen will pop momentarily. Aha, a large snake.
There we are.
Happy days. All right, there's one snake. That's the snake that's behind us. That's a live feed, by the way.
Yes,
It's not
You
a
can
film.
see
There's
mine.
Diane's. There we go. There's the hand. We'll just zoom it out a little bit. Now, we were playing around earlier, Diane, with some tape measures and the like, and having a look at this snake for a number of reasons. So first of all, how big is this snake?
Well, we did actually measure this snake with a flexible tape measure, and it is 3.9 meters long. Okay, you can see it's all nicely curled up now, but if we was to stretch it out straight, 3.9 meters. Now, for those not in metric world, that's nearly 12 feet.
Just over, over 12 feet.
Just over 12 feet. So this is a seriously big snake. You would not want to meet this on a dark night or even a light night. And yes.
And this is a real skeleton.
This is a real skeleton. Yes, that's right. So The interesting thing is, look at the size of its head compared to the overall size of its body. They don't have a particularly big head for the size of their body, do they?
Now, this
that
might
was-
explain something about
Yes.
the way that snakes actually eat food, or why snakes eat food the way that they do. Because one of the comments that we get is about venomous snakes and the like,
Yes.
and why do some snakes need venom? This is not a venomous snake. This is a constricting
No.
snake. But what's particularly special about that skull, Diane?
Well, the skull is quite small and it has pointed, sharp teeth. And snakes do not chew their food, right? They have these pointed, sharp teeth, which are quite good for gripping their teeth and piercing, or gripping their food and piercing their food, right? Not much good for chewing. So they grip hold of their food. Now their jaws can open to a very, very wide gape, actually. So they swallow their food whole.
And they don't actually dislocate their jaws much.
No,
like is
they
commonly
don't
believed.
truly dislocate it, but they do have a very, very wide gape. So they can grip hold of and swallow quite large objects, food objects, and then swallow them. And being a reptile, of course, that they take quite a while to digest their food. So they don't need to eat as much as a mammal does, where we need to eat in order to maintain our body temperature. But they do need to raise their body temperature, but they do that by absorbing heat from the outside in order for their digestive enzymes to be sort of secreted and go into action. And then they tend to go into a period of torpor. So eating for a snake or for any reptile is quite different from normally eating from the mammal. Now, these are not a snake that we need to be afraid of for their bite. They are, but you wouldn't like to wrestle with this snake. You wouldn't win. Okay, they are a constrictor, but that means they can climb trees and they can grab hold of trees and hold themselves out to quite long distances. I think John has actually taken photos of the python-type snakes that live on his property. They can climb trees and grab hold of branches and stretch out. So they do actually use all of those muscles for their movement as well as for constricting their prey. Yes.
Yeah. Now, the skeletons can be useful for something else as well, because particularly in these python-type boa constrictor things, you'll see these little spurs which are down towards the other end of the the snake. So it's sort of down towards this bit at the end of the tail. You can just about actually see where the skeleton goes a little bit slightly different just there.
Yes.
I'm zooming in on it slowly now.
Yes, I'll let you do that.
That's all right, that's fine. And so this little area is actually an area which is a leftover. You could almost call it vestigial, and it is vestigial in the truest
proper
sense.
sense of the word,
And
yes.
John's going to actually deal with this a bit more later about the back when the snakes had legs, because there really is truly fossil snakes with legs, and there's a biblical connection to that as well, a surprising one that you may not have thought of. But these are actual remnants of these little spurs, which today are only really used to sort of help the male grip the female when they're mating. But in the past, of course, they are the leftover bits of legs. So have snakes then evolved, Diane?
No, they've definitely not evolved. Now, they've changed, but change is not evolution. So they've changed in quite a significant way in terms of their body form, losing their legs and actually gaining this length. But that's a genuine change, but it's not evolution. It's actually a loss of function and a loss of growth control, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So huge changes can happen in the biological world, but none of them are evolution. It's actually a loss.
Okay.
Now we've got an interesting little thing.
We have got a
extra
tiny
bit here.
We've got a tiny. It's a slightly different. It's still a constricting snake, but it's a tiny little snake.
It
This
shows
is
you
a real snake skeleton. It just shows you the diversity that can be found within
yes.
a created group.
Yes,
But
so there it is with my fingers
But Diane, if you just want to come back to the table here and grab this large skull that we have here,
Yes.
because we're talking about fossil snakes today, right? And if you just want to hold up, I'll move the camera around and we can get a nice close up of that skull. Because here's another. This is a cast of another snake skull, but it's quite a lot larger one. What does this one belong to?
And this is Titanoboa. So that name has Titan in it, so that tells you something about it. Titan associated with giants. So if you thought that boa constrictor on the wall was big, right, Titanoboa is absolutely ginormous or enormous. And in fact, Titanoboa is only known as a fossil, which is
Thankfully.
probably just as well. And now it's interesting. Remember, we made the point about the relative size of the head compared to the overall length of the body. Well, just imagine that if this one, and we measured this as 27 centimeters long, whereas the head of the snake on the wall is 11 centimeters long. Imagine if Titanoboa had the same body proportions, how big it would be. And scientists have actually estimated the size of Titanoboa. There are other fossils of it. We've only got its head, but there are fossils from its body. And they estimate the biggest Titanoboa was about 40 feet long.
Yeah, so that's a big snake. That's like getting on for almost 13 meters in length. So
Yes.
that's quite a significant size snake. And in fact, we did a little calculation earlier as well with regards to the diameter and therefore the circumference, and it would have had a diameter in its thickest part of about 54 centimeters. So that's sort of 54 centimeters round, top
across,
and bottom and across.
Yes.
That's a pretty seriously sized snake, and you certainly wouldn't want to get a hug from him. But perhaps, Diane, just to finish this bit off, if you want to go and hold the Titanoboa skull up next to our boa constrictor skull, because that will just give a little bit of a sense of perspective as to just how big this creature really is. I mean, it is just absolutely enormous. And I mean, we're here in the Creation Research Centre, right? And basically we measured it out. It wouldn't, stretched out, Titanoboa wouldn't have fit in the full length of
From
the
one end
Creation
of the room
Research
to the other.
Centre.
Yes.
So it would effectively, just to give you a little bit of perspective, you can see Diane, she's up here at one end of the centre, right? And you'd basically have a snake that would stretch from Diane. And if we slowly come all the way around, you can see some of our displays, by the way, in the museum as well. And it would have stretched all the way down to the other end and out of the window. So that's quite a seriously sized snake in the fossil record. But it just reinforces it, doesn't it, Diane? This good to bad to worse concept.
Yes, yes, indeed. Things have changed in the biological world, but it's all downhill. It's all loss. It's shrinkage on a big scale, particularly for snakes and for sharks.
Yes.
Yeah. And also we didn't mention here, but I've just seen on the floor here, this is part of the head of a giant salamander.
This is the Toposaurus.
Yes, and we know what type of salamander it is, and they're sort of tiny, weedy little things that would barely fit in my hand as it is now. And this is just part of its head. This isn't the whole thing. This is just its head. So imagine the size of the creature. And we have an illustration and a display of this particular fossil in the Brisbane Museum, because the man who found it, who has now gone to be with the Lord, actually donated the original to us, and he made these brilliant casts. So this is another classic example of shrinkage on a big scale.
There you go.
Yeah.
So from absolute giant snake to modern day giant, all the way back to tiny little snake.
Tiny, little weedy things.
Just there. So yeah, a great change, a great variety of change, but certainly no evolution even there. Well, we're going to come back to us now. We'll just change around some of the cameras and the like, and we'll probably have a chance now to be able to ask some questions before we move on to the next section, which will be with John. So let's just get rid of that. There we go. If it works, possibly. That's good.
And you've got some thank yous to do too, Joe.
Over to you, John. Sorry, say again.
You've got some thank yous to do as well.
Yes, we have indeed. So, do you have any comments quickly, John, just while I pull up the Q&A?
Yes, my only comment really is a climate-based one, and that is that in England you can see the most disgustingly small snakes, and in Scotland they're even smaller, even though I believe you have one that's actually poisonous if it could find you and bite you.
Yes, if you can find, you would be there. Right. I think we are just about there. That's good. Okay. We have got a couple of thank yous and just one or two quick questions. So let me just pull these up here. First of all, thank you to Doki Doki Bible Club for a donation before we'd even started this morning. So thank you very much for that. And as well for 2CHF, which we had to go and look up. I believe it's Swiss francs. So thank you very much for that as well. We do much appreciate your support and your donations. So that's fantastic. We do just have one quick question. It's got nothing to do with snakes, but it is actually to do with what Glenn spoke about earlier, which is a question from Shogiwa. How did Glenn make his flat earth map? Is there only one flat earth model, and why is it compressed in that way?
Yeah, so it is really difficult to get flat earthers to commit to a map. This is the most common one, and I just took it off of the Flat Earth Society website. And I just brought it to a printer and had him print it out. I chose this size because we happen to have a plastic dome, because many of the flat earthers believe that there is a solid crystalline dome over the flat earth. So this is one of the maps. This is the most common that you'll see, but it's difficult to get flat earthers to agree to what their map really is. Notice there's no South Pole. The Antarctica goes all the way around. And notice, John, that's your Australia right there. How is that possible? Craig should have ended up in the ocean with his driving 3,000 kilometers. I think you almost not know what the shape of your continent is.
I'll just go and get my snorkel.
Okay, back to you, Joe. You seem to have frozen.
He's laughing, but he's on mute, I guess.
No, there we go. Sorry, I don't know quite how that happened. Right. Yeah, so that's all the questions and that's all the thank you. So it's back on to you, John. Straight to you.
Okay. The interesting thing is when you look at the questions that have come in, we've had a couple about snakes, like do female snakes have legs, and all of these interesting things. Some of these will probably come up again as we deal with the real history of snakes, because as Diane knows, living in Australia, we have them in my backyard. We have some huge ones in my backyard. And my wife she'd rather not know about it. So I try not to tell her when they're crawling around the backyard or up near the office or anything like that. But it's sort of almost hilarious when you send a new girl out to the storage shed and she encounters a 10-foot long, 3-meter long python just sleeping out there on the top of our books or our fossils, etc. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at a biblical picture, a biblical history of snakes. And as you know, in creation research, we make no apologies. Every scientist, whether they're Christian or anti-Christian, starts with a worldview that he usually doesn't like to tell you about, unless he's like us in creation research, where we try to be as upfront as possible. So the atheist scientist, he believes he can get away with his faith that there is no God. And he builds everything after that without telling you what he's assuming. He's assuming that there's rules in the universe when there was no one to make the rules. The rules themselves evolved, but he never tells you about that. We are quite upfront. There is a God who created everything in 6 days. We know that because our first presupposition, our first starting point, our first basis, and we're open with you challenging us on this, is that the Bible is the word of God. It's not a human document made up by Moses to keep the Jews occupied out there in the middle of the desert until they set up Israel, etc., etc. So that's our starting point. No apologies. So what I'll try and do is we can bring me up, please. Please bring my slides up.
Just getting them up now. If you want to run to your slides on your computer.
There we are. Right. You see, I've called it snake legs. You'll see our creationresearch.net Q&A. So there's lots more on here, and Diane will tell you a bit more about some of the questions we've got later on. But snake legs, yes. Here's what the evolutionist believes. Fishes that don't have legs somehow evolved into amphibians that do have legs, that definitely turned into lizards that certainly have legs, that turned into snakes that mostly don't have legs. Okay, now that's an awful lot of change from non-land, non-walking creatures up to land-dwelling creatures that seem to have lost legs even in the theory of evolution. Now, if you come to our Jurassic Ark, there's Craig at one end, there's me in the middle, and there's a very impressive goanna. Yes, we have goannas. It's a perversion of the English word iguana, because that's what the first sailors thought they were. But over the years, the English, it sort of changed. So iguana became guana, which became goanna. That's how language works. By the way, notice the language has gone downhill too. There's Craig at one end, there's me in the middle, and that's our giant model at Jurassic Ark. Because part of Jurassic Ark, part of the museum, we've had school kids there this last week. It's been fabulous homeschooling group there yesterday, and they get amazed at how big our goannas, which you can hold in your hand mostly today in your backyard in Queensland, because there's one there, a little goanna. You can see the grass from between the rocks. When you see goannas in my place, they're usually not much bigger than that. And you can see these creatures as well. In Brisbane, we have, well, is that a worm with legs, or is it a lizard that's lost its legs? What is it? Is it a snake that's sort of losing legs? Was this, well, no, it's definitely a lizard. That's what it's classified as. But when you look at the size of the legs, you say they're almost useless. And then we deal with the subject of creation. And one of the common things we have to deal with is people who think the present world is just like God created it. So how could there be a good God if there's bad people? Because God must be to blame. How could there be a good God if there's things like coronavirus? You must blame God when he already tells us that, no, hang on, I made the world good. So if that's the case, are little legs good? Around Brisbane and Queensland and Australia, you find we have plenty of reptiles with legs. Some of the skink family, they live in my backyard. Notice their legs. But then again, the same skinks are, well, they are the same skinks too, but their legs are almost disappeared. In fact, some of them have no legs at all, and yet they're skinks. Yes, they're given different species names, but in reality, as you go from my side of town to the north side of town, you can trace the devolution of the skinks. Yes, we have a big river in between, so we have a natural geographic barrier, minus the bridges that now cross it. So it's very interesting to look at, well, are these three different species or just one species with two degenerations? That's what Diane was talking about. Wet year, snakes seek shelter. Now, that's the back half of the snake. The front half is heading in under the building to get out of the storm. Now, that's a decent snake. All told, he was about 3.5 meters long. Nice big guy. You can pick these guys up, by the way. You just want to pray that he won't get angry at you and decide to squeeze. I had a friend who put one of these round his shoulders to show the kids in the class how harmless pythons were. And all of a sudden it decided to squeeze right around his neck. And the kids thought it was a wonderful act. Just as well, we managed to get it off before he ran out of air. Look at that. Oh, look at those beautiful fluorescences, those iridescences on the front. Some of these creatures are magnificent. They really are. The lovely shiny colors. You can see how people would be attracted to their beauty, provided you didn't have to worry about them strangling you or biting you. But yet we have pythons, and as they showed you on the wall mount at the back end, they have tiny little spurs. And it's definitely true that the male uses these to sort of gain some sort of traction on the back of the female when they are mating. But then these are not snakes, these are people. That's a real historic photograph. Look at what you and I would call normal sized people in the back, and look at the folks in the front. Can you say Adam and Eve looked like that? Or did they look like the ones at the back? Or do we have to be objective and say the ones at the back have to be regarded as normal if normal means the majority? And then the ones at the front, which are viable, but they are definitely not what you'd have to call normal. How did it get there? Now, most people have no trouble dealing with sickness and disease as a downward trend. What about shape? What about backbones? What about all of these things? Have the ones in the back, are they normal backbones? What about the ones at the front? You see, the Bible's emphatic. When God saw everything he'd made, it was very good. Not just good, it was beyond good. So, as I love to tell people, don't you blame God for any bad things, because he's got a different person he blames. He made it very good, put it into our care, and look at the mess we've made, particularly since the first man, Adam, chose to rebel against his maker's instructions. And you and I know that when you buy a new object, you read the warranty, you read the guarantee, and it says, this is valid only if you follow the maker's instructions. Well, that's what happened on planet Earth. By the time you get to the New Testament, there's an interesting statement where Jesus is talking to the religious leaders of the Jews, and they're critical of him. And basically he announces to everyone, if you stop crying out the praises of God, then even the rocks will cry out. Because you see, the Jewish leaders were not acknowledging Jesus as God, as God's Son, as the Son of God, as the Son of Man. And they were not praising God that he'd finally kept his promise that came from Genesis chapter 3, that he would send a Redeemer. And when Jesus read from the scroll in the temple, he was saying, listen, it's happening. It's right here now. And yet none of the Jewish leaders wanted him, with few exceptions. And he makes that statement, the rocks would cry out his praises. Now, most of us have banged a rock and heard a sound. Rocks crying out praises, verse 40 of Luke chapter 19. Read it sometime. But let's ask that question. When Jesus was on his way to this meeting, what rocks did he ride over? Well, I've got contacts all around the world, praise the Lord, and one of them took this picture. You see, the roads into Jerusalem that were paved by the Romans, many of them are still there, and you can go and have a look at them, and you can actually go and see where this came from. I mean, look at all the scratches, the wagon marks, the lot, the shoes that are up there. Very viable road surfaces, still up to thousands of years. But I had my friend take a trip to a special place that I wanted him to actually get pictures of for me. The old quarries where the Romans got these stones from. Yes, you see, when Jesus was standing on these roads talking, he was talking about the actual rocks crying out the praises of God. And Jesus, well, think carefully. He's the promised one back there in Genesis chapter 3, the one who would crush the head of the serpent. Now, a lot of erosion in these quarries since Jesus' day, but from the stones, in the roads and in the quarries, you can go to the Hebrew University and have a look at this fossil. You're right. It looks like just like the one that Joe and Diane had up in the museum. So when you have a look, don't be surprised that the evidence of that legged snake, the one from Jerusalem, one from the quarries outside of Jerusalem, gave rise to articles like this in Nature, the evolution of limblessness. Snakes, reptiles started with legs. And even the evolutionist is forced to concede that they somehow have mostly lost their legs, except for the little ones you saw on the python in the museum, the ones I showed you from our snakes in Australia. And look, even here in Australia, finally the truth seeks in, even though it's disguised. Nature, 16th of February 2006. Look at that monster on the front, reporting about a new fossil snake found at Riversley. Okay, Riversley in North Queensland. It was 6 meters long. It was 30 centimeters thick. Nothing compared to Titanoboa, but a pretty impressive snake. Now, some of you know I debated Dr. Michael Caldwell, the author of Darwinism Defeated, and he didn't win because there's a quote from his book. The fossil record serves as a historical test of change over time. Snakes used to have legs, now they don't. Now, you can call that change, but as Diane has rightly pointed out, it's not evolution in any Darwinian sense at all. Okay, so what do you think? The fossils tell us snakes evolve from predatory goanna types. Is that the way you should report it? Or is it the opposite? So when you look at our giant monsters, here's the first one we saw. Diane and I went to see this display. It was our giant goanna, the one we have at Jurassic Ark now. It was done as a robot. It was fabulous. You see, there's Diane. Hey, look, you've aged a little bit since then, Diane, but you haven't evolved at all. Like me, you are following one particular trend, and we won't comment on that at the moment. But look at the jaw. You see, we know a lot about this fossil because it was found only about 180 kilometers from my house. See Diane's hand? See the teeth? See the goanna structure? Yes, we know all about that. That's why we have our model up there in Jurassic Ark. And see the skull on the left-hand side? That's the present-day goanna. And bone for bone, jaw for jaw, tooth for tooth, it matches the fossil one on the right-hand side. So they used to be monsters, now they're midgets. Now, change, yes. Evolution, stop fooling yourselves, nature. All you authors, you actually should tell us the truth. They haven't evolved, they've devolved. They haven't gone that way from legless fish that can't walk on the land to amphibians that spend their time mostly in the water and pop their head out in the caves where I found them, and then up to the land-dwelling goannas, finally to snakes that have lost their legs mostly. You see, the provable history of snakes is that. Now, that shouldn't surprise you if you're a Christian, because the Bible talks all about not only Jesus coming, not only the most glorious creature on the planet at the time, the serpent, the cunning one. It seems the devil, a real spiritual being, just like God is a real spiritual being. The devil didn't create that, God the creator did. The devil actually tempted Adam somehow in the serpent. No, it doesn't say snake. It says serpent, and serpents have legs. And then God cursed the serpent and said he would crawl from then on, lost his legs. Now, that's another fossil. But if you look carefully, notice towards the back, it's like those lizards that I showed you. It had legs, not impressive legs, couldn't walk too fast on them, but legs nevertheless. And with a hip joint, just where Joe showed you the one on, even the tiny serpent has them, and the bigger serpent, snake, that's the word we should use, but you see, people confuse the two. No, serpents are bigger than snakes, wider than the snakes category, and some of the serpents have degenerated into snakes. Okay, you see the front of this one? Yes, I'm trying to give you as many examples as possible so you can't say, oh, creation research is only dealing with one example, and that's not enough. This is a common phenomenon. The evidence shows that snakes used to have legs, and now they have lost them. You want to know how this could happen? Well, look at this goanna up a tea tree. Yes, some of you have bought tea tree oil to deal with your fungus on your toenails. And in Australia, we noticed ages ago, under tea trees, mushrooms and fungus never grew. So somebody commercialized it. And I used to put tea tree oil on my dad's toenails because as he got older, he had trouble with fungus under the toenails. The tea tree oil is fabulous. The goannas, they don't climb it to eat the stuff. They climb it because, well, I'll be honest, the first goanna I interacted with, I was out trying to hunt the goannas because they'd been stealing our chicken eggs. They don't tend to attack the chickens, but they certainly steal the eggs. And we were losing so many eggs. And then I shot my shotgun, missed totally. John Mackay, the non-target guy. And the goanna, it ran straight up the tallest thing it knew of. in that case, it wasn't a tree, it was me. Stupid thing. Ever had a goanna on your head? Quite amazing. They can be quite large, a couple of meters long, particularly if they can break the wire and break into your pen. Okay, goannas, massive in Australia in some places. But if you want to know how it got from the goanna step by step down to the snake, then have a look. We already have lizards with small legs at the front and bigger legs at the back. And, well, I've got a word up there, Hox gene. That's a short version of an even longer word, which we won't go into. But it's a group of genes which actually, when they're working, they control things like leg length and sexual structures and things like that. When they're mutant, they interfere with body structures like leg length. You can actually lose your front legs like some of those fossils you've seen and still retain the back legs. In fact, you can end up with no legs at all. In fact, some of you know that human beings have sometimes been born without legs, even before thalidomide. So we know that things can interfere in a negative way. Evolution? No. Degeneration. But there's another interesting factor of these. How far can a snake devolve? How far can it go? Well, there's one up the top there. You can figure out how to pronounce that yourself if you like. It has legs. A python with spurs have legs. And we have a legless red-bellied black snake. We have black snakes around our place. We have red-bellied black snakes. Now, I'll give you a bit of encouragement. Most of the snakes around my place are pretty harmless. The only one we worry about is the tiger snake because he can be aggressive, particularly when he comes into the office and your secretary runs out screaming. But red-bellied black snakes, well, they're very poisonous, but they're pretty harmless because they'll run away from you. I've had them run between my legs, brush up against the dogs, no trouble whatsoever. How far downhill can this Hox gene go? Because the Hox gene is connected to not only presence of legs, but length of legs as well. It affects bone structure. Can you have a reptile with no backbone? Well, obviously at that point, you'd either have to turn into a worm or you're just not going to make it as a snake at all. In fact, if you're looking at this, I got Diane to do all this for me quite a while ago because Nature's had some good publications on Hox genes and their interactions. You can see the whiptail lizard on the left. You can see the corn snake on the right. The more the Hox genes sort of mess up, the most interesting things happen. You see how it works, we're not quite sure, but if you start to lose your legs, then the control for the number of vertebrae in your bones, your backbone gets out of control too. Lose your legs, you increase the number of segments in your backbone. Hey, that means shorter legs, longer body. It's interesting, that interaction. It's definitely real. It happens. You end up with extra backbones before you get to your back limbs. Okay, now can you see what's happening here? Snakes don't have legs. Snakes have lost legs. Snakes have got longer. Snakes used to have legs and their whole body worked much, much better. Diagram. Thank you to those who put this together. Elongation, forelimb diminished. More elongation, hind limb diminished. Everything lost. The snake now has a secondary way of moving. Now, if you think a secondary way, that has it gained something? No, I've watched lizards move. I've watched them swim, and they are sinuous. They move with an S-shaped movement. So when you have a look at snake movement, they use this to their advantage. But the lizards could do that too. I've watched them on slippery surfaces. I've watched them in water. They will use that movement in their body when their limbs are no longer effective either on water or on slippery surfaces. Provable history of snakes? Change, yes. Evolution, no. Now, I'm going to repeat that just so you don't miss it. Change, yes. The Bible says the world started out very good, then man sinned, and at that point, change was real. Adam was cut off from his creator. The holiness that covered his nakedness, now his own eyes could see how naked he was in God's sight. He couldn't even hide behind the protection God had given him. Change, yes. From then on, things went downhill, but not by evolution, not by Darwinian evolution, where E means out of, volute is refers to a shape, ION, the state of being, the state of coming out of something. You didn't have legs, now you do. Now, plenty of examples of where you did have legs and now you don't. God made the world very good. Each creature is made after its own kind. Can I emphasize that Genesis is a very emphatic and very detailed description of a created perfection, followed by statements like after their own kind 10 times? So snakes, they started out with legs, they can lose legs and still basically retain the same entity. You see, the Bible emphasizes that there has been a real change, and that's the one that preceded all other change. No apologies, you evolutionists out there, you atheists who don't want to concede the evilness of man, then I'm sorry, but you have no trouble, no ease of explaining situations like war or murder or Gaza or anything like that. Man sinned, the ground has been cursed, death has entered the planet, and the world changed from good to bad. Yes, you come to Jurassic Ark, we even have a serpent on our mural with Adam and with Eve. No, that's not an apple she's eating. Apples aren't mentioned till Deuteronomy chapter 30 or so. But look at the serpent. He's got legs. He's beautiful. Deuteronomy 32, the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He kept him as the apple of his eye. That's how we still use it. But you see, no apple in the Garden of Eden, just the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Eve ate of it. And then her husband, knowing full well what God had said, because Eve wasn't there when God said it, Adam chose to join his wife. He chose to sin, which is why the Bible says, with one man came sin, not with one woman. Well, there's the picture as the middle-aged artists and up into the 1800s portrayed Eve, the apple, and Eve and the serpent, legless. What's interesting is it's not a very accurate picture, because by the time you get to the last book of the Bible, it talks about the old serpent, Genesis chapter 2 and 3. That old serpent who is the devil. So we know we're specifically talking about it's not just the devil, it's Satan. And it's not just the devil or Satan, it's the dragon. Now, dragons always have legs. See, that's why we painted it that way. That's why I told the artist, actually put it in so we can provoke the kids. Yep, you've heard me say it before, and you'll hear me keep saying it again, and it'll show up in all our museums. Just pray that our new model of Lucy will get to Australia to show how far down our theories even degenerate. Lucy has no resemblance to man at all. There are many theories that disagree with everything in the Bible. The theory of Lucy standing upright and turning into you and me disagrees with everything in the Bible. So does much modern science. Oh, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Quote unquote, as we've said before, science is defined as any explanation without reference to God. No wonder it disagrees with the Bible. Stick to the facts. The facts don't. The facts are in total agreement with the faith beginning in Genesis chapter 1. Yes, faith is a starting point. Without faith, it's impossible to believe in God. Without faith, it's impossible to even seek God. No apologies for that. That's a statement of fact. Yeah, you heard me right. It's a fact that without faith, you can't even begin to seek God. There's the Bible history. It's designed, it makes no apologies. The whole history of the world, the knowledge of snakes having legs is designed to lead you to the Jesus. Oh, the interesting bit, Jesus was walking on those rocks that came out of the quarries that have a fossil snake with legs, and the Bible says he would crush the head of the serpent. Little interesting analogy there, don't you think? Because when he died on the cross and rose from the dead, that's exactly what he did, and he did it for you and me. Your Bible is accurate from the very beginning, when everything God made was very good. So therefore, as we swap across to our question time, what are you going to actually be doing about that? We need to get me out of here now, Joe, and back to you. Where are we? There we are. All right. We got rid of my. Why do I still have my things up
Hang
there?
on, I'm just trying to. There we go. I'm turning you off. There we are.
That's better.
That's good. Oh, hello,
Hello,
Sam. Nice to see you
Hello,
there.
Sam.
Hello. Apologies. Apologies. I was caught up with something a little bit pressing, but I'm here now. It's all good.
Good. Fabulous. That's great. So let's go on to, there's a few questions that have come in, so that's great. And in fact, I've been trying to, I've noticed you'll start one that I hadn't noticed. So Sam, it's over to you. Back to your old job.
All right. Great stuff. Question coming from Shogiwa. Question: do lizards also have the extender jaw? Brackets. Not sure what to call it.
That's your question, Joe.
Not really, no. So basically, it's not even so. It's kind of an extended jaw. You've got a special bone. Number one, and put me up to full screen if you wouldn't mind, Sam, so I can kind of demonstrate. Where we are, we're over there. Okay, so effectively on the bottom of the snake's jaw, you've got two halves of the jaw which are not joined together, and I'll show you on the big titanoboa in a moment. But number one, they don't have a chin here, where we have a hard bony chin. They don't have a chin. They actually have a large ligament and a flap of skin that moves up into the mouth so that they can open it out like that. Now at the back here, where we are obviously a hinged jaw, again, it's not fully hinged on a snake. What you have is a special bone called a quadruped bone, which effectively folds down. It tucks itself up, it folds down as the snake opens its mouth. So the jaws, which are sitting here separated like this, effectively go like that. Okay, now lizards don't have that. Lizards have a fixed jaw, same way, well, not exactly the same way as we do, but it's a hinged jaw like we do. But if we get our titanoboa over here, which is only just kind of balanced together at the moment, but you can see what we can do is we can do that, right? The head is actually completely separate from the two jaws. The two jaws are two separate bits. And then if Diane, if you would hold that up for me like so I can kind of come around on this side. The jaws effectively fit on like that. So you have stretchy ligaments at the back here, the quadruped bone, which fits down. It's not joined at the front here. And so the snake's mouth can effectively go like that. And yes, the titanoboa would be able to go like that, if not bigger. Okay, so they are pretty impressive set of jaws in the snakes, but not the same as in reptiles.
So how is, if snakes have come from lizards, how is that modified, Joe, from the lizard?
I suspect that they haven't evolved from lizards, or haven't even come from lizards. And John can comment about the legs. We've got a legs question as well with regards to lizards losing their legs. But there are a number of specific things in snakes, like the quadruped bone, for instance, which lizards don't have. Certainly not lizards today. And so that is something that would require an addition of information, an addition of a feature, rather than a degradation of a feature. So I suspect whatever the ancestor of the snake was, even when they had legs, because we know that they used to have legs, would have also had this quadruped bone. The one thing that you can't do with a hinged, the one thing you can't do with an unhinged jaw, bearing in mind, and I mean that not in the sense that snakes unhinge their jaw, but in their jaw is already not a hinged one, right? The one thing you can't do with a jaw like that is chew, right? Lizards can chew, lizards can rip, crocodiles can grab and chomp and can spin and pull and tear, and you can't do that if your jaw isn't actually fixed in place, right? Because you'd pull your jaw off. So instead you have a jaw that actually works by going in sequence, kind of drawing and clawing the food into its mouth. So you would have to have that set up effectively from the beginning to eat in that way.
Okay,
So that's Shogiwa's. That sort of answers Shogiwa's question, I think.
Sorry about that. Since you mentioned my name in there, Joe, I'll come in on that. When you have a look, and someone's asked a question about, we only have the word serpent in French. Now, when you look at snakes, they are in serpentes, right, as a technical group. So they're still called serpents. When you look at the biblical picture of serpents, it obviously is a walking serpent, and there is undeniably only one serpent involved here back in the Garden of Eden. Now, the principle of degeneration after sin came in has spread far and wide. So it's not just that original serpent who, as you rightly point out, would have had to have a jaw that is capable of extension, as you've mentioned. Now, the degeneration has spread not only through that family, but to across all the families, but not descended from that original serpent who's cursed by God. The question that some people have asked is, where does the word snake come from? And that's an old Proto-European word meaning creeper or crawler, right? So that when you look at present day snakes, if you come to Australia and see a snake for the first time, it creeps along the ground. So it's a very descriptive term. We'll call it a snake, which is old Proto-Indo-European for a creeper or crawler. The Vikings had a different word. They referred to it as an orm, like their little legless amphibians in the caves that look like worms or snakes, but they really aren't. That they used a different word because it was a creeper or a crawler, but it lived in holes in the ground, etc. So when you look at this, the original serpent is the one who is cursed. The original serpent is the one who actually would have to have that structure already in place. From then on, it can lose things. From then on, the number of its vertebrae can be multiplied. And some of you may have relatives in amongst your family who have one or two more backbones than normal. It's a degeneration. They may have one or two less, and that's a degeneration. So this degeneration has not just been confined to that original Serpentes family, but it's spread far and wide across the whole of creation, so that the lizards we talked about, many of them have definitely degenerated. Some you can watch them degenerate across the river here in Brisbane, right? Going from legs on one side to not so good at leg transmission on the other side. So you see it in many families, and you see it in human beings. That group that I showed you were definitely that they were kept as a menagerie by one of the kings, because he was so fascinated by the little people who'd lost the ability to grow and who'd lost all sorts of things in backbone structure and you name it. Diane, you might want to comment on that sort of deformation in human beings as our medical expert on the spot. Have you got anything to say on that?
Yes, it's something that happens during embryological development, and it goes back to that group of genes you referred to called Hox genes, which is short for homeobox. So it's a group of genes that control the basic body plan, because remember, we all start out in life as just one big round cell, which will then multiply into a ball of cells. And then out of that, you've got to construct a body with a head at one end and a backside at the other, and a backbone in between, and limbs coming off the side at the appropriate place along the backbone. And not all backbones are the same. Not all the individual vertebral bones are the same. There are some that are designed to be neck vertebrae and some that are designed to be thoracic or chest vertebrae, and they have ribs associated with them. And so as you're forming this body, the instructions need to go out. All right, we need to make so many neck vertebrae. Then we need to change the system and bring in another group of genes, and they will make thoracic vertebrae or chest vertebrae. And at that change over time, that is actually where your upper limbs, if you're a human being, start to grow, or the forelimbs of a four-legged creature will start to grow. So another group of genes has to be activated and say, right, we're going to grow some legs here. Now, if something goes wrong in the way that the body plan is set out, so that we have neck vertebrae here and then we change to thoracic vertebrae here, if that change doesn't happen properly, the limbs will not grow, because they lose their cue, as it were. They lose the chemical signal that goes out, all right, start growing some limbs here, and in the meantime, we'll make some thoracic vertebrae. And so it's a process where, again, it's a degeneration. Even though you may end up with a longer body, you end up with a loss of limbs, because the signals are getting garbled in the process that's making the body.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's probably a similar thing that's happening to the pipefish that I've talked about in the past.
Yes,
the growth
indeed.
genes with the body in the seahorse family, and the pipefish are extending long ways. Yeah.
Joe, I've got a question along the lines of the question. You've talked in the past about how when you worked as in the zoo, that you got bit by an iguana and you couldn't get loose from it. I assume that's because it's got a jointed jaw, but with a snake, have not jointed but connected by muscles, can you just grab them then and open their mouth up?
Yes, with difficulty, because those muscles are quite strong. So it depends on the size of your snake again, right? Oftentimes with a small snake, like a small python, like a royal python, or the Americans call it a ball python, oftentimes you can encourage by slightly squeezing the side of the head to get it to open its mouth. But they have remarkably strong jaws. So it doesn't work if the snake puts pressure on it. So, for instance, like a crocodile, right, or an alligator grabs hold of the meat and does the death roll, right, it spins something off, right. If a snake tried to do that with the weight of its body behind it, it would rip its jaw off because it's an unhinged jaw. But when it's biting you and you're trying to pull it off, they can be remarkably resilient. There's a few different ways. You can try it the traditional way with lizards, which is to squirt a bit of vinegar in the corner of its mouth, but it doesn't always work very well, as I found out. The other way is to well, it's not very nice, so it really does depend on. Normally with a small snake you just leave it and it'll eventually let go, right, because it doesn't hurt very much. With a big snake, particularly one that's squeezing you at the same time, the best way is to actually dunk its head in water. Because it will let go of it much quicker that way, right? And normally they have enough sense to let go of you before they drown. So that's if you ever get bitten by a large non-venomous snake, that's a tip for you there.
Well, I think there's another problem with Glenn's suggestion is you've got to find someone that wants to grab either side of
Grab them, exactly.
Not me.
Yeah.
All right. Next one.
All right, Sam.
Sam.
Let's have another question. We've got a few more minutes,
right.
about another 10 minutes left or so.
All right, great stuff. Shogiwa asked another question. Just for clarification, are you saying that snakes were once lizards, or that lizards losing legs is a good analogy of how serpents losing legs becomes a snake?
I'll take the first bit. Joe can take the second. Diane the third, perhaps. Number one, your biblical picture is there was a serpent, right? And the serpent is the one who was cursed originally. And the curse is passed on the whole of creation. Now, that one group there, that serpent, when you look at his family, they would begin to lose legs straight away. So you would find a degenerate loss, either incapacity or total leg loss, finally in that one family. But that curse has passed on the whole of creation. So whether you're human beings, you can lose legs, not a common feature, but shortening of backbones is, lengthening of backbones is. When you find many creatures that have elongated, such as the lizards, they tend to become like the ones we showed you, the tiny little limbed, but they're still visibly lizards, right? And they look, well, some people call them, snakes, but they're not snakes. They're just limbless lizards, and provably so. So when you look, it is not the lizard that's giving rise to the actual snake family. The guys up at Riversley should have used the word serpent when they took goanna as that, and we still have goannas with legs, but this change has happened many times since the curse came onto the ground. And you need to get that into your mind, that the curse has affected everything, not just the original family of that serpent. The curse has passed on the whole of creation, and that's why the book of Romans says the whole of creation cries out, waiting for the coming, right? So that even your plum tree, or your apple tree, or your dog, we live in a cursed world. And that's why the gospel is such good news, that you can receive Christ, and that curse, its effect on your spirit and soul and mind, that's where it first of all shows up. I'm changed because Jesus is in me, but I'm looking forward to when my body is no longer cursed, right? I'm not taking this body with me to the new heavens and new earth. I'm going to get a brand new one. So, Joe, anything else do you add on that one?
Just to add on a quick comment that with regards to snakes, There's no doubt that they have lost information. You can see that. John's dealt with that with the legs tonight. But if you look at this question of, well, could a snake have evolved from something else in the first place? It's up there with the idea that venom could have developed by itself. When you look at the complexities of venom and not only the complexities of the venom itself, but also the hardware that the snake needs in order to effectively inject and use that venom, you can't come to any other conclusion than this was a creature that was designed with a jaw which was designed to be able to open very wide so it can swallow things whole, and it was a creature that was designed to inject venom into its food. Now, notice that says nothing about what it actually is eating at this point. And there's no doubt about it, snakes today, particularly venomous ones, majority of them eat meat, right? But you find that there are a number of snakes that have been recorded eating plants, and you'll find that venom is just as good at digesting plants as it is at digesting meat. And so it's a mechanism by which the snake uses to eat, right? But the point is, venom was designed, the hardware for venom was designed, and the snake's jaw was designed. So there's no doubt about it. The snakes have gone downhill. They've lost their legs, but they haven't evolved from one type of a creature into another. They haven't turned from lizards into snakes. Whatever the original ancestor was of the snakes that we have today, it's certainly gone downhill, but it still has features that are distinct from other types of reptiles.
If I could throw one last thing in there, Joe, for those of you who want to know the recognizable difference, search Serpentes versus Lacertilia, right? So the lizards are actually classified in a totally separate group because they have so many differences from snakes, even though some of the lizards have also lost their legs.
All right.
Great stuff. All right, let's move on. We'll do some super chats. We've had some super chats come in. Thank you to Neil Grindley for 10 British Buckaroos. Greetings to our team and chatters. Greetings to you, Neil. God bless you. We've also got a super chat from George as well for 20 Aussie Buckaroos. The genes that produce the front limbs of various tetrapods are not the same gene number. If evolution was true, these genes would be the same. Interesting point. We've also got a question here from Tokenomics, who has asked, since have no genetic data if we find a single unique fossil specimen, how likely is it to be a new species versus a runt offspring?
Okay, I'll throw something in then. Anybody else? If you look at the history of dinosaur names, and Craig's out in dinosaur country in Australia at the moment, out at Longreach. That name's got nothing to do with dinosaurs. That's named after the local river where the town is situated on the long reach of the river. So what you'll find is when you look at dinosaurs and you get the Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs, the number of groups in the dinosaur family's gone up, down, depending on what we call lumpers and splitters. So Diane, take over. What do we mean by lumpers and splitters?
Lumpers and splitters. Well, we have to remember the classification system is actually something that we have imposed on the living world. God made things according to their kind. So in the original creation, yes, there was serpent kind and there was lizard kind, right, which was one of the kinds of reptiles. And they are still recognizable as separate kinds, which is why legless lizards are called legless lizards, even by the evolutionists. No one is claiming that they are turning into a snake because of those differences in their head structure and their jaw structure. The legless ones retain that. So that's why they're classified as lizards. So things weren't multiplying after their kind. The word that is used there in the Greek version of the Bible is actually a word that we're familiar with, genus, which we use in the classification system. But human beings like to organize their knowledge of things. So when we looked at the world around us, we like to organize things according to, well, this group and that group have a lot of things in common, so we'll put them together in a category that's different from this other group, which is a bit like those ones, but it has a lot of differences. And so we organize our knowledge of the living world according to differences and similarities. And that's where it becomes complicated as to what significance do we give to certain similarities and to certain difference. And so that's where the terms lumpers and splitters comes in. Lumpers tend to look more for similarities, group things together. Other people tend to look for differences and say, oh, the differences are more significant than the similarities, so we'll separate these two groups of things according to their differences, and we'll give them different names. So you have split a big group into two small groups. Now, the individual living organisms themselves have not changed. All that's changed are the labels that we have put into them. So remember that with the classification system, it's just a means of organising our knowledge of the living world that we might understand it. But that doesn't mean that things are evolving into another because we've given them different names. And in fact, the megalodon shark was a good example of that, where it's been given a different name. The titanoboa and the other boa constrictors have been given different names. So that's all. It's a good reminder.
I'll take up the last half of Telenomics' question on if you only find one specimen have no genetic data. This has happened many times. You will find that if we find a dinosaur and it's sort of 2 meters long and 0.5 meter high, we get so excited we found a new species. Later on, we find a whole batch of them fossilized together, including the big ones and the little ones, and the little ones turn out to be only the babies of the big ones. So you go back to the drawing boards and unclassify your new species back to the major name. Now, the number of dinosaur species has gone from 700 to 350. Now it's expanding again. So don't be impressed by the number of species out there. That is an arbitrary term. Go closer if you want with genuses. But remember, if you're dealing with fossils, you can't breed them and see where they came from or see where they're going to. Without the genetic data of crossbreeding, you are just guessing, and you need to be honest about that. So I hope that helps you, Telenomics.
Every outback town. Sorry.
I was going to say, keep in mind, scientists are human, and one of their main is to get funding, to get publications. And if you develop or find a new species, you've got a publication. And I've seen that in some fields of science that can be fairly prolific. That's true. A publication that's funding. And sometimes it works out later. They come back and refine that. But there is a motivation to finding a new species and classifying something.
Yeah, the other motivation for finding a new species that you have naming rights, so you can name it after yourself if you like, or you can name it after some person that you like, or if it's a particularly ugly sort of thing, you can name it after a person you don't like.
So look up Macaensis if you want to see anything. Craig, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that every outback town in this dinosaur region out here seems to have their own variety of sauropod dinosaur. And all they're really finding at the end of the day is pretty similar bones.
Yeah. And it's just to remember, a reminder that the easiest way to deal with any question that refers to a species is simply ask what a species is, because there is no definitive definition of what a species is, partially because we know that there's got to be, I mean, if you think of the way that Carl Linnaeus thought, it's a special type of a kind, and there's no doubt about that. There are special types within a kind, but because God created by kind, where do you define which are the special types or not? It's all down to human beings, and even in an evolutionary perspective, you don't have a definition of species because they're supposed to be changing all the time. So until you can define what a species is, you really can't argue whether one has changed from one to another. What we certainly haven't seen is kinds evolving. But anyway, it's about time that we wrap things up. We're coming up to the 1 hour 30 mark. Hopefully that's been good. It seems to have been well received in the chat. So thank you very much for everybody for listening and for watching. And we will be back next week. And next week we will have our second ever live audience broadcast, because we will be at the convention. It was 2 years ago we had our last live audience broadcast. But we'll be back at the convention and we'll be with an audience. So God bless everybody. And we will see you then. Catch you later, folks.
Goodbye.